Chapter 21. The War Intensified. The tragedy of war is that those who had nothing to do with the decisions that led to war suffer the most. Zil Ukukiri. I was just 7 years old when the civil war broke out in Nigeria. The war lasted 3 years and was a catastrophe for my family, my village, and my country. The eastern region of Nigeria, inhabited principally by the Egbo ethnic group, my ethnicity, responded to a variety of crises that followed Nigeria's independence from the British in 1960 by declaring itself a sovereign and independent republic called Biafra under the leadership of General Ojokwo. The Republic of Biafra seceded from the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Both republics took up arms and entered a merciless bloodshed that wiped out millions of lives. The war lasted from May 1967 to January 1970. After my village, Afikpo, was bombed, my family, along with other villagers, escaped and lived in different parts of eastern Nigeria, on the run as refugees throughout the war. By the time my family moved to a city called Okwele, the war was at its height. There was no long-distance communication system during the war. Usually, if you meet someone in the marketplace, you began asking questions. Where had they come from? Whom had they seen? Or when a new set of refugees moved into the area, we asked if they had seen such and such a person. That was how news spread, by word of mouth and by the coincidence of running into the right people. In this way, we learned that my paternal grandmother, Nusandai, had died. Her death was caused in part by the stresses of the war. It was a sad time for all of us. Happier news was that my maternal grandmother from Owana was alive. Arrangements were later made for my mother and grandmother to connect. Our grandmother was also relieved to find out that we were alive, for she too had been worried. One day, my mother, my oldest brother, Iki, and a village neighbor, Ahaba, who had escaped Afikpo with my family, went foot to a local market. We had long ago abandoned our cars due to lack of spare parts for needed repairs. It was a distant market, about 4 hours by foot round trip along dusty unpaved roads, but it was the only marketplace where a variety of foods was available. We might have had to walk on foot to a distant market, but we were luckier than most in that we did not strive. There was such a scarcity of food during the war that more than 1 million innocent civilians died from starvation at a refugee camp near where we lived. I saw children and adults whose heads were resting on bare bones. They had not eaten a real meal in months. From a distance, you could count their ribs and in fact their entire vertebrae. There was hardly any flesh left on their bodies. Many were infested with disease, yet they remained alive. I realized then that human beings have an incredible ability to survive. There were relief efforts by the Red Cross and other humanitarian agencies from around the world, which were greatly appreciated. But often during the distribution of food, many refugees, having starved for a long time with fight over the food. Unfortunately, some who badly needed to be fed were too weak to fight for their food. The tragedy of war is that those who had nothing to do with the decisions that led to war suffer the most. That day, while my mother, brother, and neighbor went in search of food, one of the most devastating military aerial bombings of the war took place in Okwele village. The fighter planes were so relentless that those of us who remained took cover under trees and buses for practically the entire day. The shelling and automatic weapons fire went on for hours. We could hear heavy machine gun fire from the military barracks located a few miles from our refuge home. That day marked the climax of the war for us. It seems the enemy was determined to completely level and destroy everything. At the end of the air raid, many lives were lost as usual and much property destroyed. By then, we had seen so many brutal and senseless killings of innocent civilians that we'd become desensitized. However, following the bombing of Okweli, we worried about my mother, brother, and neighbor at the open marketplace. We waited all day for them to return, but they were nowhere in sight. The night was growing dark since there was no electricity. There was complete darkness by 7 p.m. That night we got news from people who returned from a village located close to the market area. They reported that every single person at that market had been killed by the air raid. That was the first time I ever saw my father shaken. He shouted, "That's impossible." My brothers and I panicked and collapsed to the floor, crying. As practiced in my culture, my father took a bottle of palm wine to the side of the house and started calling on every ancestral spirit he knew. He called on some names and oracles I had never heard him call upon before. He poured the wine continuously on the ground, engaging in libation and asking the spirits how such a tragedy could be possible. After about an hour of incantation, he came back to the house and reported that our late grandfather had appeared and assured him that no family member had been hurt in the air raid. Of course, we dismissed his report. We thought he was only trying to calm everybody as well as to maintain his own emotional balance. In the meantime, I, 8 years old, prayed myself to exhaustion, asking God to bring my mother home. About 9 that evening, I heard my mother's voice out of the darkness walk. She, my brother, and our neighbor, they were returning from the market with baskets on their heads. You cannot imagine our joy. From that moment on, a deep part of me was devoted to this sacred essence that we call God, for it had been delivered. My most precious wish. I could not have imagined what life would be like without my mother. By Zil Ukugiri.